Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on the Good Road of Life. This is Lucy Simpson. I'm the Executive Director of the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center, and I'll be helping to facilitate our webinar today. Before we get started, I just want to go over a couple housekeeping issues with everyone. Everyone at this point is in listen-only mode. So you're all muted, but if you have questions, there is the chat box that you can use to type a question. You can also put questions into the question box, and then that will give us, I'll get a notification on our end that you do have a question, and we can make sure to go through all those questions before the webinar is over. For the most part, we'll probably wait for questions until the end, but just to encourage you to use the question box if you do have any questions, so that we can make sure we get everyone's questions answered. Today, I'd like to welcome Clayton Small, who is the Director of Native Pride, and he will be doing the presentation for us today. So Clayton, if you want to go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Lucy. I want to reach out with a warm handshake to all of my relatives in Indian country, hoping that you have an awesome season's greetings and just a great time the next couple of weeks here. So it's a pleasure and an honor to share this afternoon with you, talking about our Good Road of Life curriculum, the GRL, and this is a part of our, we are an American Indian nonprofit based out of Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I am from where Lucy's National Indian Resource Center is located on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, Lame Deer, Montana. That's where I was born and raised. My Cheyenne name is Pivanahen, which means good warrior. I'm a strong believer in our Cheyenne way of life and in our ceremonies, our healing ceremonies, where I've seen miracles happen. And I think that's probably our greatest source of strength, is our spirituality and our ceremonies. And so I wanted to introduce myself in that way. You see on the screen our website, part of our website, Native Pride, our mission statement. We focus on using culture and healing and strengths as part of our curriculum. And we focus on, the impact of colonization, historical trauma, and how that plays out today and still affects us in our journey to wellness. So we became a nonprofit in 2007. I work with about 2,000 Native youth per year and about 1,000 men and women using our Good Road of Life curriculum and our Native Hope curriculum. And Lucy, if we can slide down there. I wanted to use my own personal journey to wellness, and it's never complete. We're all just a work in progress, right? And it's important for us in our healing journey to know our family history and to know how that affects our behavior today. And we try to keep the good behavior from our family, and we set aside the unhealthy behavior. We break those multi-generational behaviors that are not good for us and our own children and grandchildren. So I wanted to start off with just a little bit about me. So you see a picture there of my parents, and I'm one of 10 children. We have a big family, and my father had many brothers who were ranchers and cattlemen, horsewomen, and so the picture there is a handsome and beautiful couple, as part of their wedding photo. They were both of my parents are products of the boarding school. My father attended the Busby boarding school located on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, he and his brothers. He lost his mother when he was very young, probably 10 or 12 years old. My father became the mother for many of his brothers and sisters. His father was always away working, and so my father assumed that role for his family. And they were sent to the boarding school during the school year, and then from the Busby boarding school, he and his brothers went on to Chemawa, Oregon. And while they were in high school there, they joined the Army. And so my father is a World War II veteran. He's 91 years old and still with us, and we're just very blessed to still have him there. But he was traumatized as a young son and young man as a result of the boarding schools. Abandoned from his family of origin, and had a difficult time, as anyone would, being taken away from their family, from their parents, from their home. My mother was an orphan child, and her mother died giving her birth. Shortly after her birth, her mother passed on, walked on to the Creator. Her father died when she was young in a coal mining accident, and so she was raised by her grandparents and relatives. And she was sent to the Catholic boarding school on the reservation. And at that time, the priest and the nuns were harsh with their discipline. And her grandfather, Wooden Legs, went to the school one day and said, "My granddaughter will not be returning to your school. I didn't bring her here to come home crying every weekend when we pick her up." So the boarding school and being abandoned by her family was traumatic on her as well. And so my parents were wounded. They suffered early childhood trauma, having the sense of abandonment, and so their world was torn apart at a very early age. And so they had to use their strengths and resiliency to overcome that. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. And here's a picture of my father. He would be the second handsome young man from the right. They're wearing their boarding school uniforms as they work with dairy cows and livestock at the Busby dorm. And so this was home for my father and many of his friends. The Busby dorm, the Chemawa school became their home away from home. And for a lot of the boarding school students, they stayed there year-round. They didn't have a place to go during the summer, so the boarding schools became their home forever. And so we'll move on. My father said that it wasn't all bad, that he learned many things at the boarding schools. He learned how to work. He learned how to take care of livestock and how to be a rancher and a hard worker. Here's a picture of my father in his military days, a World War II veteran. Him and his brother Melvin are the last two World War II veterans on our reservation that are still living today. And then as we move on, you're getting a sense of my family. This here is my father's father, Tom Small. Followed the cattle herds from Texas, where he was from, and ended up in Montana. And married a Cheyenne and a Lakota woman who was also Mexican-American. Tom's wife, my father's mother, spoke 3 languages. She spoke, well, actually 4: English, Cheyenne, Lakota, and Spanish. They had a big family. And so, you know, from a very, for many generations, our family on the small side have been ranchers and horse people and rodeo cowboys and cowgirls. So that's part of our family history right there. And then moving on. On my mother's side, her grandfather, this is a picture of Richard Wooden Legs. He was a teenager and fought in the Battle of 1876 on the Little Bighorn, where the Cheyenne, Lakota, and Northern Arapaho annihilated General Custer and the 7th Cavalry, perhaps the greatest victory on the Northern Plains by Native people. Richard was tall and handsome and strong And his friends said that this man never gets tired, that his legs must be made of wood. And so that became his name, Wooden Legs. And he fought in that battle, lived to tell about it, lived to be a very old man, and had many different duties in leadership on our reservation. But he took care of my mother, and he was good to her and instructed her on our Cheyenne way of life. And as we move on here, you'll see a picture of Richard as an elder. He did ledger art. He was a tribal judge. He was a policeman. He was a rancher. He did many things, and that's part of my ancestors that I'm very proud of. And as we move on here, I wanted to focus on some of my strengths. So my family grew up on the reservation. We were poor. We had some cattle and horses. We had a ranch. We had a garden every year. There was alcohol in my family. There was sometimes violence in my family. And that goes back to our historical trauma that we've been talking about here. And so as a young boy, as a young son, I made a decision early that education was my ticket out of poverty, and that I had to use my strengths. So here's me as a powwow dancer, Northern traditional dancer, embracing our culture, embracing our ceremonies, embracing our spirituality, helps us to overcome adversity and bumps in the highway. This next photo, I believe, is me as a horseman, growing up with horses, having my father and grandfather on both sides, horsemen and horsewomen, rodeo. And you learn how to work when you are out there on the ranch. You learn to be self-sufficient. You learn to appreciate the land. And so it's amazing that Native people can be Native and horsemen and horsewomen. You know, we are flexible in that way. And the last photo is me as a marathon runner. You know, in my younger days, I competed in marathons, 15 of them, qualified for the U.S. Olympic trials. So if we focus on our strengths, our gifts, and our talents, those strengths can help us to overcome the adversity, including historical trauma, including unhealthy behaviors that we witness constantly every day in our life, on the reservation, in our family, and in our community. So a focus of our Good Road of Life curriculum is addressing men's wellness issues. And there's some information in here just regarding the high at-risk status of Native men in the U.S. and in Canada. And I'll just give some additional data here regarding Native men and Native people. The death rate for Native people is 50% greater than non-Hispanic whites. The suicide rate is 50% higher for Native men and women who are younger than 25 years of age. According to CDC, the mortality rates are enhanced by high incidences of diabetes, smoking, problem drinking. CDC mentions that half of the American Indian men who die prematurely, their deaths are preventable. The death rates for our men is 2 to 5 times higher than our American Indian females. In a study done in 2010, our men experience greater disparities in health and general well-being than any other group by race and gender. And in that survey, what kept reoccurring for our American Indian men was a sense of hopelessness and not being worth anything. I'm worthless. So these kinds of information are really a call to action for us to intervene in a good way to help our men and women. And the earlier the age we can focus on prevention, the better. So as we move along on the screen here, the Good Road of Life, we're going to focus on that. So as an organization, we believe in a strength-based program to focus on our strengths. And in Indian country, what we have far too often is a focus on gloom and doom and chicken littles running around everywhere shouting out the sky is falling. And so we need to, we need to change that attitude of cynicism, and we need to focus on our strengths and a belief that every day is a new day, and no matter what comes into our path, we can overcome that by using our strengths. And we believe in our trainings that it's important to create a sense of belonging and create a safe and sacred place for not just awareness and education, but for healing. And we believe that men and women can make positive changes in their attitude and behavior. And we believe that Native men, women, and youth can support each other in a peer counseling approach. In other words, youth helping youth, adults helping adults. Those are our core values. And this is the model. This model came out of my dissertation study, which I completed in 1996 at Gonzaga University for my PhD. And this study was basically a study about me and other men, my brothers, who struggle with historical trauma, with unhealthy behaviors. And so I just want to quickly walk through this model and give you some examples of what came out of the study. These are issues, you know, as we go layer by layer into our own hearts and try to redefine ourselves and to find ourselves and to get anchored and to get further in our wellness and healing journey. You notice on the screen that spirituality is in the middle of the circle. And for our men, that means, for the most part, ceremonies. For us on the Northern Plains, it means doing the Sundance ceremony, sweat lodges, fasting on the hill, going without food and water, and pleading to the spirits to have mercy and to take pity on us and to bless those that we are praying for. The Native American Church. So these are examples of spirituality, and it can also mean going to organized religion and Christianity. And for many of us, it's a combination. It's blending those different forms of spirituality. So we'll start on the east, and that's the new beginning. That's when the light bulb should click on for us that I'm the enemy and my attitude and my behavior needs to change. And using spirituality, we start our journey to wellness, kind of where the sun rises, new life, a new beginning. So from the east to the south, you see on the screen that this journey requires us to be sober, clean and sober. This is difficult work, and we have to have a clear mind and a clear heart. So whatever it takes for us to maintain sobriety. And you know, for some people it's treatment. For others it's ceremonies. For some people they're not addicted to drugs or alcohol, but maybe their family, they grew up in a family, so they're like an adult child of an alcoholic family. So we just need to know that we can't be abusing drugs and alcohol in this journey. We have to heal from the historical trauma. We have to know our family history and what was our parents' life like when they were children, and our grandparents. Did they go on relocation? Did they move to the city? Did they grow up on the reservation? Was there alcohol and violence in their family? And how can I overcome that? Or am I going to repeat that in my own family? And so this is healing. This is emotion. This is tears. And this requires feminine strength, feminine power, not necessarily by gender. Each of us as men and women have both masculine and feminine powers within us. I'm going to ask Lucy to go to the slide called "The Sister Saves Her Brother." And in this slide, it was taken from the Northern Cheyenne people. We had a battle. It's called in the history books, where the battle on the Rosebud Creek, up between Sheridan, Wyoming, and Busby, Montana. And it's a historical site today. This battle occurred between the Cheyennes and the soldiers shortly before the Battle of 1876. They fought all day. There was no victor. There was death and losses on both sides. During the battle, the warrior, a Cheyenne warrior, was wounded. His name was Comes in Sight. He was crying on the middle of the battleground, and he was saying, "Someone save me. I don't want to die today." His sister, buffalo calf robe woman, riding her warrior horse, wearing her elk's tooth dress, rode into the middle of battle and reached down, and her brother swung onto her horse, and she took him away to safety. And so that battle is called where the sister saves her brother. The brother is weak and wounded and holding on to the horse. and his sister, representing that feminine power, emotions, feelings, and healing, is standing strong and tall. So this is the message for Native men and women, that our feminine power is healing in tears, and that we need to be willing to go there to get further in our healing journey. So we'll go back to the model now. So it's important, I want to note here that artwork, stories, we also use coyote stories here, and ledger art to depict the themes that men and women need to be working on in their healing journey. As we go from the south to the west, one of the major issues is forgiving our own parents for the things that maybe they said or did that hurt us when we were a young son or a young daughter. And that's kind of by parent, by gender. In other words, fathers and sons. Sons have lots of unresolved issues with their fathers. Daughters have unresolved issues with their mothers. And so we need to find a way to forgive them, and to not to hurt them, but maybe have a conversation, write them a letter, talk to them, and work our way through to forgiveness and acceptance and healing. So sometimes, if our parents aren't alive or we've never known them, it means writing a letter or going to their gravesite or participating in a ceremony, but finding a way to forgive our own parents so that we can then become good parents for our children. And sometimes we have a sense of shame and guilt about our past behavior. We have to forgive ourselves. We have to forgive others who have hurt us. And we have to move on to acceptance and wholeness. And so there's a ledger art there that I'll have Lucy put up there called Counting Coup, that will help us kind of maybe see this in a better way. So this is a battle, this ledger art. And ledger art, by the way, was done by our ancestors, primarily from the northern plains. They drew these images with bookkeeping, ledger, accounting paper that they got from the trading post and from the soldiers. And oftentimes this artwork was done when our ancestors were incarcerated in prisons because they were refusing to go to the reservations. And during their incarceration, they drew these images of what life was like when they were free. So if you Google American Indian ledger art, you have a history of our ancestors. And in this depiction, the warrior is riding his yellow horse. This is the battle of 1876 on the Little Bighorn in Montana with General Custer and the 7th Cavalry. There's arrows, there's death on both sides. The warrior has captured the flag, the U.S. flag, and he has weapons tied to his horse that he's taken during the battle. And instead of using the weapons, he's counting coup. He touches the enemy and he rides away. The message here is that we can show our courage without being violent or destructive. To heal, to cry, takes a lot of courage. So that's the message in this artwork. We'll go back to the model. And as we move from the west to the north, we feel better. We've come a long way. We know how to be interdependent with our family and our community. We probably have a job. We're providing. We're taking care. We're parents. And we have worked on our communication skills. We know how to resolve conflict. We know how to check our ego. And life is pretty good at this point in our life because we've done a lot of work. We've broken some unhealthy behaviors from our family of origin, from our family history. And we're walking into that light of goodness. And this artwork that will depict that is called a victory dance. And it's men and women standing side by side. And they're singing a victory song. The men are on the left. They're using hand drums. Their faces are painted with charcoal because there were lives lost to gain victory. The women are on the right wearing striped chief blankets, and their faces are painted red and yellow, depicting honor and beauty and wonder. And the women are wearing eagle feather headdresses. The men and women are wearing their finest regalia. They're standing side by side, singing a song of victory. And in our journey to wellness, in our healing journey, as we get further along, this is how we view the world. We view it as a victory, that we are in balance and that we are in harmony and that we are moving forward. And as we go back to the model, we go from the north back to the east. You know, the north represents being an elder, being generous, giving back, being a mentor, being a guide, being a role model, setting a good example, being of service. And so the journey becomes complete and we go back to our Creator. And so this model came out of the study. These are some of the issues that we need to work on as men and women. And the younger we can provide this awareness and this opportunity for our teenagers, the better, so that they won't have to suffer as long as some of us before we had this new beginning and before we realized that it's never too late for us to work on some positive changes. And then as we move on here, I'm getting close to summarizing the Good Road of Life. This is our table of contents. The GRL has a participant manual and there's a trainer manual. And these are some of the topics that are introduced with artwork, with stories, coyote stories. And we do that with humor. We go from a large group to small clan groups where it's safe for them to do a talking circle and talk about these different issues. So there's colonization and racism and how that's affected the role of men and women. It's important to acknowledge that colonization will never go away. There'll always be a stronger power, a stronger nation that wants something from the weaker nations, and they find a way to take it. And that impacts, the indigenous people. And how do we break the historical multi-generational trauma? Maintaining sobriety, using spirituality, working on our hostility and anger management. We have a protocol on domestic violence where the participants actually sign a nonviolence contract, that they make a vow not to, in the future, hurt their family, any member of their family. How we resolve the shame and guilt, how we forgive our parents, how we address suicide, sexual orientation, communication skills. And then there's homework. There's follow-up homework here around 4 different topics. This is a 3-day retreat, and then we ask the participants to do some homework in teams of 2. And I think the next slide shows those topics. So we ask the men and women to get into a healthy, legal support group after the retreat. It might be going to counseling. It might be going to treatment, going to ceremonies. It might mean any of those things that will help them, to stay on their wellness path. And then we ask them to go deeper into their spirituality and convey and pass that on to their children. Naming ceremonies, puberty rites ceremonies, visiting sacred sites, getting initiated into the powwow circle, those kinds of things. And then to understand our family history and to break those unhealthy cycles from the past. And then to forgive our parents for any unresolved issues that might be there. So the participants do follow-up homework here in teams of 2. This helps them to continue their journey and to help and support other people from their community. So that's the homework, and we'll move on here. There's the ledger art. And that's where we want to be. This depiction here was done by a Southern Cheyenne, Richard West, who was a curator for the Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C. I call this spirituality. These are 2 warriors, Cheyenne warriors. The one in front, painted yellow, wearing yellow paint, has our masculine power covenant, our 4 sacred arrows tied onto his lance. The 4 arrows possess masculine power. When they're renewed, this bundle is renewed every spring. It renews the masculine power in the universe for our people. The warrior in the back on the red horse is wearing our feminine power covenant, Isiwan. It's the headdress of a sacred buffalo female. And this is the symbol for our Sundance ceremony, where everything in the world and the universe is made new again through the suffering of the dancers. So we have a covenant, one for masculine power, the arrows, one for feminine power, the Sundance. And these covenants are kept by keepers. They take care of them. They pray over them. They open them at certain times. They renew them with the help of the people. And so the teaching here is that when men would ask the keepers to wear these covenants into battle, the people would always be victorious. The people would always find food and shelter. And the families in the community would always thrive and live to see another good day. And that's the power of our spirituality. And I think every tribe has these kinds of covenants. And we have supernatural beings that brought these teachings and covenants from the Creator to the people so that we could use them in a way to help each other. And so we're going to close, I think, with our PowerPoint there. And then I'd like to see, oh, here, I'm sorry. This ledger artwork here is contemporary. This was done by Butch Thunderhawk, who's the art teacher at the United Tribes College in Bismarck. Fabulous artist. He granted permission for us to use this piece that he's completed. And this is, so in our Good Road of Life, we have a retreat that's designed for men only, although women can serve to help as clan leaders and instructors. But men learn how to talk to other men. They learn how to help and support each other. And then when they complete that retreat, then we invite them back with their wives, partners, girlfriends, family members, and then we do a retreat on Native families. In other words, focusing on keeping the families together, no violence in the family, spending quality family time, and passing on good teachings to our children and grandchildren. So this ledger art depicts a healthy family. The dragonflies are powerful, so powerful they say that when they clutter together, they create a tornado and they create magic. And so this handsome man and woman, husband and wife, father and mother, are creating magic with the help of the Creator and the spirits by honoring their family. Beautiful artwork. So our Good Road of Life addresses risk factors, unhealthy behaviors, breaking multi-generational behaviors, historical trauma. We create a safe place in these retreats for men and women and youth to come together to find that awareness, to open that door to their heart, and to get on a wellness path, to support others, and to move forward the way the Creator intended for each of us to do. Lucy, I think that's the last slide.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Clayton. I just wanted to, we did get a comment in our comment box, and it goes back to the slide on when you were talking about the spirituality, and someone had just commented, I just want to repeat this for everyone's sake, because when you were talking about when men would ask for permission to take these covenants into battle with them,
right.
Someone had made the comment that in that process they gain the approval of the women in the community, and in that way they earn their leadership within the community. And I think that's a really good point to make.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's that balance and harmony. You know, the role of men was sacred. The role of women is sacred. And historically, those roles were preserved and practiced. And then with the impact of colonization, especially for our men, those roles were taken away. You know, one example of that today is the high unemployment rate on reservations. You know, 90% or higher. So when men, fathers, husbands, grandfathers are trying to provide for their families, protect them, there's not much opportunity to get a job. So that makes it difficult for their self-esteem to fulfill their role as a man. And so that's kind of the historical trauma. Our men are having a difficult time finding their way, protecting their family, protecting their people, providing, those kinds of things.
So I think, you know, we're ahead of schedule. We have some time if anyone does have some questions. If you want to type something, even just type question in the box, I can unmute you and we can have a little more of a conversation if anyone does have some questions. And Clayton, while we're giving people a chance to just write, jot something down in the question box so I can know to unmute them, do you want to, we've got the contact page up with your contact, and give them a little bit of information about the Good Road of Life curriculum, how they can, you know, bring this to their communities, a little bit about the process, how you do the train the trainer. So these can be things that community members can take and begin to utilize on their own, and give a little information about that to all of our participants.
Very good. So you have up there my email that I check every day, claytonsmall@aol.com, and then our website, www.nativepridus.org, has a nice overview, a lot of photos, good information on our Good Road of Life curriculum and our Native Hope curriculum. And so our Native Hope curriculum is a second curriculum that I didn't get into much detail here, but I work with about 2,000 Native youth per year using our Native Hope curriculum, which focuses on suicide prevention and the related risk factors, which are substance abuse, violence, bullying, coping with trauma, depression. So that's a separate curriculum that's endorsed by Indian Health Service and SAMHSA as an effective culture-based program. Indian Health Service Behavioral Health awarded us in 2009 for outstanding work in suicide prevention in Indian country with our Native Hope curriculum. So that's available. And then our Good Road of Life was actually developed through a 4-year grant from the Administration for Native Americans, ANA. They gave us a 1-year grant to develop the curriculum, and then 3 years to take it around the country free to partnership communities. And it's on ANA's website as one of their most exemplary projects, effective projects. And so now our Good Road of Life, we take out on a fee-for-service. The best way, I guess the ideal delivery in my way of thinking, is to go into a community and we do a 1-day training of trainers where I work with a team of people, including just local community people. We try to incorporate behavioral health professionals, social workers, counselors, spiritual leaders, and then we walk through the curriculum. We practice what it means, how do you facilitate a group, how do you do group process, and then that team helps me do a 3-day retreat on these different topics that we just discussed here on the Good Road of Life. And then we do a follow-up, 2 weeks to 4 weeks of homework, working in teams of 2. And both of these curriculums can be used for youth and adults. They can be used by gender. It could be a men's retreat, could be a women's, could be men and women. So we're very flexible with how they are implemented.
Clayton, we have a couple questions here, and the first one, we've got a couple of questions from Tom Delaney, who's with the Minnesota Department of Education. And Tom, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, and if you want to have that conversation. I think Tom's questions were, I'm going to go ahead and mute him again. We can hear now it's good. We could hear some background noise. But Tom's question was, how have communities, how do they look different with this curriculum? And Tom, do you want to go ahead and ask your questions?
Sure, can you hear me?
Yeah, we sure can.
Oh, that's amazing. I didn't know my computer could do that. Hey, yeah, so my question is, you talked a little bit about implementation, and it sounds like you use a train the trainer approach and setting up teams within communities. But I was just wondering too, with this curriculum, can you identify some communities where it really took off, and how did you get everyone on board to make that change happen? And if you were to go to those communities today, what is it that you would see that you wouldn't have seen before these teams got together and people made change happen? That's what I'm just wondering. Thank you for opportunity to ask a question.
Good question, Tom. So in response, I would say one of the tribes that really took off with the Good Road of Life was the Wind River tribe, the Northern Arapaho. I've been there several times. We've done a men-specific retreat there, several of them, and then brought back the men and women together. And the sponsors there actually went to their tribal council and had their law and order codes amended. Historically, what happens to perpetrators of domestic violence is they're put in jail, and there's not much opportunity for rehabilitation. And most of these perpetrators are men. They're fathers, husbands, boyfriends. And so historically, they're put in jail at some point. And so what they did at Wind River was they incorporated an intervention. They gave the courts and law enforcement, the men, the batterers, had an opportunity to complete the Good Road of Life and work on behavior changes versus staying in jail. If they made a commitment to complete this training and a commitment to change their behavior to nonviolence and to make some of these changes, that was an option for them. It was an opportunity to work on healing versus just being in jail. So that's the best example I think I can give where organizations, tribes look at rehabilitation and healing versus punishment.
And this is Lucy. I think I know that they've done the Good Road of Life here in Lame Deer, and also with the Hope, Native Hope for the suicide prevention. My husband used to work with Lame Deer schools, and they took a group of youth to one of these trainings. And I think that one thing to think about is there are situations like Clayton was talking about where you can see a larger change within the community at large. But a lot of times what we're looking at is making a real significant change within the self-esteem and lives of individual people, and we think about the impact that those individuals can have by taking those lessons and that lifestyle out to their family. And so we have seen just within this community a significant change in some of the attitudes of particular youth who have had the opportunity to participate in this program.
Yeah.
There's another question from someone wanting to know if there's a curriculum for schools, or is it just the 3-day retreats?
Well, I mean, it can be made a part of what we do with the Native Hope program. Is on the 3rd day of the retreat in the school, we help the students create an action plan, strategic action plan. So what they do then is, number one, they organize a youth council, or if they already have one, they strengthen it. And so it's an opportunity for the youth to practice leadership, organizational development, fundraising, sponsoring ongoing activities. So we give them the nuts and bolts on how to start a youth council in their school. They do presentations to the school board, tribal council, parents on awareness, and then also on fundraising, so they can sponsor some good activities. We ask them to start support groups, one for young men, one for young women, once a week for 6 to 8 weeks in the school or community. And then we ask them to do peer-to-peer presentations because it works. Who has the most influence on youth today? It's not parents, it's not teachers or coaches, it's other teenagers. So we want to give them some tools and skills on how they can help other youth who are in trouble. So when we do our Native Hope in the schools, they have an opportunity to do some pretty comprehensive follow-up in this action planning process.
So we have another question from Sheila, and she says, males can tend to be resistant. How do we begin the process to soften them and remove that resistance to really be open to this process?
Good question. Well, it goes back to Tom. We all want some instant healing, and we want our communities and our families to be healthy and strong. But the reality is it's a slow process. It's little by little. It's, as Lucy said, it's one person at a time, getting that awareness and making a commitment. And, there's no magic pill or there's no silver bullet. This is hard work, which is why, people put it off. It's overwhelming when you start thinking about it. And it just has to happen that way, kind of one person at a time.
There's a question here on.
Let me add on to that.
Okay.
Thank you. So, how do you get men to show up? It's really difficult. You're right. It's a challenge, but I think and I'll say this in a way that hopefully people can hear it. Our Native women have been traumatized. They've been hurt by our Native men. And a lot of our women don't trust our men, and for good reason. Our men have been confused and lost. We've been violent. We've been addicted to drugs and alcohol. 1 out of 3 men ends up in prison to this day. So I think a lot of our women have lost hope that the men in their lives are going to really make a significant change. So I guess I would like to just ask that our Native women find a way in their heart to not give up on us, and that you would continue to reach out to the men and encourage them to go to counseling, to go to a retreat, to get help, to find their spirituality, to go to a ceremony, and just encourage them. Now, you can't do it for them, I know that, but I think our men just need that nudging. They need a push. And if they know that the women in their life love them unconditionally and can be there for them, we're going to see a bigger response from our men.
Someone asked if the slides are available, and that's just a general point that I forgot to make at the beginning. This webinar is being recorded, and so the slides will be available on National Indigenous Women's Resource Center's website, as well as the webinar. So if you have coworkers, other people that you would like to share this with, they can watch it at their on their own time and download it whenever to watch. Or if you want to share this with anyone from your school or anything like that, you can access that later through our website.
Lucy, let me tag on to that. A couple months ago, I had a journal article published that I think the listeners would find a really good follow-up to this webinar. And Lucy can make that available, I think. But it was published in the American Professional Society on the Abuse of Children. And it was a special issue for Indian country, and 4 of us submitted comprehensive articles that were published. And mine is addressing suicide prevention in Indian country. And this organization responds to children and families that are affected by abuse and violence. So I just want to encourage you to follow up with Lucy and get a copy of that nice article.
Yeah, I think what we can do is we do have that article in PDF, and we can, since everyone, when you registered for the webinar, you used an email address, and we can compile those together and send the send the article out to everyone, and you can, if you want to read it and find it useful, you'll get an email with that within the next day or two.
Awesome.
So we have a couple more comments. Some are comments, some are questions. Lawrence has a comment about the role of men being sort of being changed and being taken from them through the banishment of ceremonies and some of the side effects of that. And I'm going to try and scroll up here to find Lawrence and unmute him, and you can maybe make that comment, Lawrence, yourself. There you go. You're unmuted.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh yes, I was just commenting with regard to how it is that our men are the way that they are today. Most people don't realize that in the 1900 or so they banished the ceremonies, and the importance of that is that the ceremonies are actually used to indoctrinate, orientate, and even a training for your girls to become women and your boys to become men. And so in that way, when you have freedom of expression through your ceremonies, you're not shy, you have confidence, and you're able to express yourself properly. And so today, when we have 150 years where our boys and our men were indoctrinated in boarding schools, then the end result is there's no love and sharing and nurturing coming from the men who came out of the boarding schools for present day boys and men today. And so most of the time the boys who are in our communities are growing up without fathers and have never had a nurturing relationship with a male figure. And at the same time, because the fathers are not in the home, these girls are growing up without any masculine presence in their home. And as such, we all fall prey to America's democracy, where they give you freedom of choice. And in that freedom of choice, invariably, our teenagers make the wrong decisions because they want to do things that are not good for them.
Well, that's an excellent expression, Lawrence. Thank you for that. I guess I want to say amen. Thank you. I guess I'll add on and say that just from a personal experience, when I entered into our ceremonial way of life as a sun dancer, faster, Native American church, sweat lodge, what I think one of the biggest benefits of our ceremonies is that you are transformed and spend time with the spirits. A lot of us, we question, is it real? and in our ceremonies, we discover that they are real, that there is a higher power. We see it, we hear it, we experience it. And what that does for us is it changes us forever. It changes our view of the world, our view of ourselves, our view of our family, our children. And so I guess I just want to affirm what Lawrence is saying here, is that our ceremonies are so powerful. And in our trainings, we just encourage our men and women to go and ask for help, to offer your food and tobacco and try to get yourself involved in some of these ceremonial experiences, because it will change you forever in a good way.
Clayton, we have another question, and I'm not sure if I'm saying this right. Sumita is asking how the Good Road of Life addresses violence against women and children through your curriculum.
Very good. Well, throughout the Good Road of Life, there's a focus on violence prevention. Every participant, male or female, signs a nonviolence contract, and they make a commitment to not hurt their family in any way. And they talk about that in their team They're placed in a small team. They fill out this contract. They talk about their experiences with violence, domestic violence, and they make a commitment to make some of those changes. We also have them do anger management. They do a hostility survey, which addresses their level of negative attitude or cynicism, how they are currently managing their anger. So there's like 4 tips on anger management. Tip number 1, and if you do these 4 things when you're angry, you're managing your anger appropriately. Tip number 1, when you're angry, don't hurt yourself. That means self-harm. That means suicide, cutting, abusing drugs and alcohol. So, you know, we need to not do that when we're angry. Tip number 2, when you're angry, don't hurt other people, especially the people you love, your spouse, your children. That's like domestic violence. Don't do that. Tip number 3, when you're angry, get better at forgiveness. Let it go. Don't hold on to it. Tip number 4, when you're angry, it's okay to take a time out. Don't say or do something where you're impulsive and you're going to regret it later. You know, go for a walk, go to a sweat, talk to somebody. And so we spend a lot of time over those 3 days on anger management and hostility and violence prevention. We have people give testimonies, and that opens the door for other people to take a look at their own behavior and what will it take for me to be a nonviolent person. So there's a major theme of nonviolence in our Good Road of Life training.
We have another question from Stacy, and I'm going to unmute you for this, and it has to do with the issue of, and I'm not sure if this is for Clayton or for me with NIWRC, but the question is about protection orders and when there's issues of domestic violence that impact a situation where the perpetrator and the survivor of the violence might both be at a powwow.
Very good. Let's hear it.
Hi, this is Catherine. I'm sitting in for Stacy.
Oh, okay.
We've had some, we've been working on personal protection orders and such, and there became quite a heated discussion about, well, not heated, I would say it would be a constructive discussion about the personal protection order prohibiting a perpetrator from attending a powwow or perhaps some other community event that the victim would typically naturally be present at. And there were just some, strong feelings that, number one, that it's not correct or right to take away a person's right to be involved in their ceremonies and their rituals, and number two, that how does that affect the victim when perhaps she has PTSD or whatever, so she's going to be prohibited from going to those things. So it wasn't her action that created the situation, and yet she is essentially, it's kind of a blaming the victim kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
We were taught that there was many other avenues available for the perpetrator to do healing, and I really liked your idea about the Good Road of Life, and that perhaps completing that, and of course the victim hopefully healing, that we're not talking about a permanent banishment, but how do we balance those things? A victim's right and a native, the right to be involved in ceremonies and rituals.
Lucy, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, that's a really difficult question, and I think that's the question. How do we balance that when we're looking at ultimately wanting to the ultimate goal being to prevent violence in our communities, but acknowledging that we're not there yet, and we have to have a way to respond to violence in in a way that's appropriate to that particular community. So I don't have a specific answer of this, this is the formula for finding a good balance to that situation. I think you need to take into consideration a number of different things. Some communities are more focused on the criminal justice system. Some have more of a traditional accountability system that they've been able to develop. And I think it's going to take a real look at your specific community. And always, these cases are going to be, a case-by-case kind of balancing situation. I do think, when it's that ultimately we have to look to the safety of our women and children who have been exposed to violence. And so I think that in the large part should be probably the overarching consideration. But that doesn't mean in every situation they should be, the other individuals should be prevented from participating in certain activities. I think it's going to, because it is a balancing situation, you've got to take all of those different things into consideration and look at each case. And probably didn't help you very much.
No.
Well, let me add on to that. So a protection order is designed to help the person not just from physical violence or domestic violence, but I think, here's other kinds of violence. We always think just physical violence, but there's sexual violence, psychological, verbal, spiritual, financial, and social. And, when one person in the relationship uses violence to intimidate the other, they're trying to control and dominate the relationship. And so that might include social situations. And so, and Lucy's right, there's nothing easy about this, but the goal really of your protection order is to keep the mother and children safe.
Well, by not, I don't want to say banning, but by not preventing a perpetrator from attending a powwow, it essentially prevents the victim from attending the powwow.
Right.
So it's like, okay, again, where's the balance? And
right. And I think that's where, you need to look at those particular situations. But like I had said, I think ultimately, where we're coming from a situation that you had mentioned, to the end result is if you don't keep the perpetrator away, then in many of those situations, it's going to prevent the woman from feeling like she can attend and be able to be safe while she's there. Not in every situation, but in a lot of situations, that's going to be the case. And so I think that, there, to some extent, one of the ways that we need to be able to react to respond to violence within our communities is to make sure that there is accountability for the perpetrator. And like I said, some communities that's going to be more along the criminal justice lines, other communities not. And where their ability to participate in an activity that, a powwow, which might be something that they're looking forward to, and there are consequences. So, to that violent behavior. So, I think, there is a balance of those kinds of considerations, but ultimately the overarching concern should be the safety of that of the particular woman and her children in that particular situation. So and the fact that we do need to hold perpetrators accountable.
Yeah, but there's just an overall resistance to implementing that type of sanction.
Yeah. Well, and there's an overall, difficulty and resistance to implementing accountability in general. I mean, part of the problem why we see such high rates of domestic violence in our communities, and I'm not talking at this point not just about Native communities, but across the country, is as a community, as a society, we're unwilling to hold our friend, our brothers, our people that we grew up with accountable for what a lot of people think is a private matter, and it's not. It's a community. It affects our entire community, because our families in Indian country, it's not just the husband, wife, and the children. We extend out to our entire community, and so there's a resistance in general to any kind of accountability. So I don't, that's whether it's a powwow or something else. We face that kind of resistance, and being able to hold our community members accountable for that kind of behavior is something that we need to be willing to do. And like I said, that doesn't have to necessarily be criminal accountability. Look at the example that Clayton gave earlier about what some of the changes that they implemented at Wind River are to try and be focused more on rehabilitation and healing. And that is that can be a form of accountability as well.
Right, absolutely. And I was not really sure what this was going to be about, but I would like to thank Clayton for, bringing forward the male side of this, because, something's gone wrong in somebody's life for them to behave in such a way. And it's, I think it's both sides, again, need healing, and that balance issue being brought out again. So I'm going to encourage some folks to watch this video and get kind of a male perspective on this whole, and how they too have been impacted by historical violence. So
okay, well, thanks, Stacy.
So Lucy, I'll mention too that we have some DVDs that are available for both of our curriculums, the Native Hope and the Good Road of Life. They're about 45 minutes to an hour. People can see our process occurring in the 3-day retreat, and topics that we cover. And it's good information, it's good awareness. So those are available too through our office. People can buy the DVDs, and it's good information, it's awareness. And if you're looking at maybe bringing in one of these trainings to your community, it would help, like the tribal leaders, directors, to get an overview of what good things could come from this kind of training.
Clayton, that brings me to, there was one last comment from someone at Navajo, and I think this is a good point. They'd asked if you had developed a Navajo-specific Good Road of Life curriculum, and if not, would you be willing to meet with some community members to walk through the curriculum to be able to really make it relevant for that community. And I think that's that's something that and Clayton can expound on this, but I think that when a community goes to Clayton to pull in the program to try and get something set up within that community, there will be a process of just sort of trying to see what it is that you're dealing with specifically, and so that the focus can be that it can become culturally relevant to that specific community.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very open to that. In fact, when we do the 1-day training of trainers, if the community wants to use their own protocol for how to do the prayers, how to do the smudge, bring in their own singers, their own stories, their own artwork, all of that is very good. And in fact, at Navajo Nation, I do a lot of work out there, Yacht Day to my brothers and sisters. I was just in a Navajo community the last 2 days, and they took our Native Hope and they created Dene Hope using their stories and some of their values and teachings. And I'm open to that for any tribe that wants to make it more culturally appropriate for your own, tribal protocol. I think that's really a good thing, and I'm very open and willing to work with that.
Okay, well, I think that actually brings us, that's, the last of our questions. So I just want to thank you, Clayton, for taking the time to provide this overview to through NIWRC to all of our participants, and encourage everyone that if you do have some follow-up questions, you can contact Clayton directly, and if there's anything that NIWRC can, if you have some more questions that are a little more specific to some issues regarding domestic violence and safety for Native women and children, you can coordinate through us at the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center. And I will be sending out that article that Clayton had mentioned earlier through to everyone who registers emails probably within the next day or so. So if you don't get it by Friday, feel free to contact me directly, and we might have had a problem with our email server, but otherwise you should be getting that. So thank you so much to everyone for taking time out of your day to participate with us, and wishing everyone safety and health and joy over the next few weeks for the holidays. And thank you, Clayton.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Lucy, NIWRC, and did